Now, a lot of Missouri culture has been lost, and what I told you was how many years I spent having to look for things. It was like panning for gold. You just went through a lot of information just to get a little bit of color about the Missouris. And then I would, kind of set that aside, and then eventually I reached the point where I said, well, I've got enough here to actually write a story. So how do you recover a culture that for the most part is lost? And one of the key ways is archaeology. And one of the things we see in the cultures that preceded the Aniota culture, which existed roughly about 1000 AD up to 1700, was that the earlier cultures, the Mississippians, some of the woodland peoples in Missouri, used these notched flint hoes for gardening. And the Aniotas quit using these and started using buffalo scapula for garden hose. That tells you something. That tells you that agriculture is not as important to the Aniota as it was to the earlier Mississippians. They're hunting more. And agriculture is not the mainstay of their food. It is becoming supplemental to hunting. We can look at the points, and certain styles of certain points fall within certain periods of time. This is typically the arrow points they use called Madison points. Earthen pots, ceramics. Even after they began trade with Europeans, the Missouris were still using earthen and clay pots. But I think they found out something. If you cook and eat food out of copper and brass, you might make yourself sick. So they stayed with their earthen pots. And I'll show you what they did with their metal tray pots that they got. But here's some other items that have been recovered from Missouria sites, and that's twisted wire used for decoration, pieces of lead with a hole punched in for decoration, rings from a Jesuit priest, a thimble with a hole drilled in it used for ornamentation, and a piece of copper that beat into a kind of a bauble or an earring. And you tell a lot about people by what they're eating. The Missouris dug food caches, like this pit that these women are in. And when those food caches, if they spoiled or weren't in use anymore, they became trash pits. So a lot of these things, these items here, were found in places like food caches turned into trash pits. So we get all that stuff out, and we get an idea how they lived. Then we look at that and we contrast that information with what we know about other tribes. The Osages were next door neighbors of the Missouris. The Missouris were closely related to the Oto in Iowa. So I look for commonalities. What kind of customs, what kind of things are they all doing and sharing? And you look and say, well, the Missouris are in the middle of that, so go figure. The Missouris are probably doing the same thing. And then you look in the archaeological record to see what you can corroborate. And that's how you begin to build back the story of the Missouri people. Here's one example. This is the Utes tablet. This was found in 1935 at the Utes site at Van Meter State Park. Van Meter State Park is the largest Aniota site in Missouri. It's been continuously occupied since about 1400 AD up to about 1725 AD. The site encompasses over 300 acres. I think it's actually bigger than that because we've gone out and looked on some ridge tops where supposedly there wasn't anything, and there's village remains everywhere. The place was huge, although probably all of it was not occupied at one time. But the Utes tablet found in 1935, this is color enhanced to show you all the designs on this thing. It's actually pretty small, about 9 inches long. And it was probably part of a medicine bundle. In other words, for ritual ceremony. One side represents the upper world, the sky. One side represents the lower world, beneath the earth, and I'll explain how in a minute. These are the elements broken out separately. This demonstrates some continuity that Indian cultures that are still with us today historically have connections with prehistoric Indian cultures that are thousands of years old. In this case, this is a gorget with a Mississippian warrior on it. I think that thing's dated around 900 to 1000 AD. This is elements off of the Utes tablet, the Aniota period, about 1400 to 1500 AD. There are some common design elements here. This guy has around his eye what we call an eye surround. You see it on this image of a hawk. You see it under this kind of M-shaped image here. That's a symbol of the sky. That tells you that this guy is a member of the sky clans. It tells you that hawk or that falcon there is an animal of the sky. This thing he's holding in his hand is a mace, a kind of a war club. And this is a symbolic outline of the mace there. The arrow here, he has an arrow as part of his hair adornment there. This represents the constellation Cassiopeia, we think, and it's a representation of the underworld because Cassiopeia, the constellation's at its height in the winter, and the winter is the time of death, when the lower world's ruling. Now, as I go through some of these things, what I'm trying to press upon you as you go along is how very complex and how sophisticated the beliefs of the Missourians and other Native Americans are. Most people don't understand how really complex and sophisticated they were and how much they studied the cosmos and the stars and tried to relate to it in their cosmology. Now, this eye, like I said, this eye symbol, this has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And here's where it comes from. Off the peregrine falcon, you see? So it's part of that. They identify the things that they saw in nature, and then they adapted that into their spiritual beliefs. And by the way, what's going on here, that's a speech symbol. That means that falcon is bringing a message from the sky, from the heavens, so to speak. Here's another Mississippian gorget that's hundreds of years old. You see around this, you see woodpecker with a big crest, which is probably the ivory-billed woodpecker. Ivory-billed woodpeckers have spiritual significance. Here's that image off of the Utes tablet again. That's of a woodpecker. And here we have a more contemporary picture of an Otoe, Missouria leader, Shungapee, good horse, also known as Big Kansas. This painting of him was done by Charles Burt King in 1821 when he was visiting Washington, D.C. And of course, we see the woodpecker design on the Mississippian gorget, on Aniota, and here on this contemporary. This odd looking, and I apologize, some of you, it would be hard to see. You just have to buy the book and look at the picture. His headband up here, these odd looking things around there are the bills of ivory-billed woodpeckers. So the bird has a sacred connotation to him. He's wearing a feather in his headdress. There's the feather there. He's holding a war club in his hand, which is a variation of the mace of the war club. So what I'm showing you is that there's continuity in these beliefs and traditions going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. These things just were not discarded overnight. When the mound builders at Cahokia and some of these other great Indian civilizations kind of broke up and were no longer congregated in those large urban areas, their descendants, these people, are still out doing the same thing. This is an Osage, and again, Osage are local. Osage interact very closely with the Missouris as Shingawassa, a handsome bird, done in 1805. And again, there's that Ute symbol of the falcon or the hawk. That's what he's got on his head, on top of his headdress there. The woodpecker, there's those ivory-billed woodpecker bills. And I have seen artifacts in the Osage Tribal Museum collection that actually have the bills and body parts of ivory-billed woodpeckers in their regalia that are hundreds of years old. So what I'm just showing you, I'm showing you the continuity, I'm showing you how in tune they are with the cosmos, and even something like a woodpecker or a hawk has great spiritual significance to these people. And we have some ethnological information too, recorded at the turn of the century from some of the elders that remembered what these things were about. So spirituality pervaded all aspects of Missouria life. And what's going on here, this mother is painting a red stripe down the part of her daughter's hair. That represents the path of the sun. The sun travels, the sun's the giver of life that travels from east and west. And they even divided their villages on an east-west axis. Everything on the north side of the village was under the sky clans, like the hawks, the eagles. The buffalo was actually a sky animal. They believed that the buffalo came down from the heavens. Then on the south side of the village, you had the earth clans, which was like the bear, the deer, the snake, things of that nature. But in the middle was that sun, the giver of life. And they all realized that they were all going to travel the path of life. In the east, it's the beginning of life. In the west, it's the setting of sun and death. And so that representation is there to remind them of their mortality.